Welcome to Growing Bremerton Together with Mayor Patty Lent. My special guest today is David Nelson. He is the editor and the interim publisher for the Kitsap Sun. Stay with us. We're going to learn about where the Sun has come from and where it's going. Welcome to Growing Bremerton Together and Mayor Patty Lent. My special guest today is David Nelson. He's the editor and currently intern publisher for the Kitsap Sun newspaper. 81 years in the city of Bremerton. We're going to learn about all the things that you bring to printed material, David. And first of all, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did you land in Bremerton?
I was born in Jamestown, New York, but I didn't live there very long. My parents were there on work, and they, within the first year of my life, moved back to Washington State, where my father had grown up. And so I grew up in Skagit Valley. I went to Mount Vernon High School, graduated from there, and went to college at North Park University. It's a small school in Chicago. And so I ran track there, did a little bit of newspaper there, and enjoyed living in Chicago. And I worked in book publishing following getting an English degree. And so after a few years in book publishing, I decided the pace was too slow. And I went back to school, got a master's degree in journalism at Boston University, worked at some small newspapers in Boston, decided I liked the West Coast better than the East Coast, and then I got a job at a small daily paper in Utah, northern Utah, north of Salt Lake City. I worked there for a few years, moved up to become an editor, a city editor, which is kind of a lower line in an organization. And then in 2007, excuse me, got a job at the Kitsap Sun. They had an opening. I came up here, and 2 years after arriving here, Scott Ware, my predecessor as the editor.
I knew Scott.
Scott decided to retire, and at that time I replaced him.
Then you have been with today, the Kitsap Sun. It hasn't always been called that. Long enough to have had 3 different publishers. And tell us, you said that Mike Levi hired you. And wasn't he at least, how many years was he a publisher? 10?
About 10, about a decade, I think. Yeah.
And then after him, it was Charles Horton.
Correct.
And he was here about
3 years?
3 years.
Yeah.
He and I did several things within the community.
Yeah.
And then Brett was the last publisher.
About 2 years.
2 years. Now there's some exciting news going on. So let's talk first of all about the Kitsap Sun. It was the Searchlight and then the Bremerton Sun. I'm not sure how many names it's had,
Sure.
but you might tell us the history.
Sure, I'll give you the short version of the story. In July of 1935, 2 young men came over from Seattle, and there was what was called a Scripps League. It was a set of cousins with the last name Scripps who owned newspapers in Tacoma, Seattle, and there may have been one other in Washington City, and they decided Bremerton would be a good place to put a newspaper. And so they sent Julius Gaius over. He was the first editor of the Sun and ended up being the editor for decades. He came over, he was 25 years old, and his business partner was also about 25 years old, so it was really young guys. And they started the Bremerton Sun on 4th Street, essentially out the alley of where we are now.
My goodness.
There was also the News Searchlight, which had absorbed the daily news into the Searchlight prior to them being there. This is the Jessup family. And within 5 years, the Sun it was a newspaper war. You know, they were across the street from one another. They were fighting for news, fighting for customers, everything like that. And 5 years in, the Sun was bleeding money. Both were hurting from this competition, and there were actually a lot of newspapers around the county at that time. Through 1900 through 1935, there were dozens and dozens of papers. Every little community had one. The Sun was struggling, and a man named John P. Scripps, a cousin of the Scripps League fellows, decided to come in and buy it. And so with John's investment, it survived. It then absorbed the News Searchlight, and so that's when the two became the Bremerton Sun. The Jessup family finally, they gave up, and he took over. John kept the business in his family for decades. His son Paul lives in San Diego. And
Paul's been up. He came up for that ribbon cutting, the special 75
Paul
years.
is a wonderful person. The son is very special to him because of what his father did. And he's always been really supportive and visits us often and things like that. So that was the history of the Scripps family and what then became the E.W. Scripps Company, which the newspaper has been a part of until last year, excuse me. Last year, the E.W. Scripps Company broke its television stations into one company and merged with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Was that something they wanted to do, or was it because finance? A lot of companies were doing that.
Correct.
Radio and news media as well as print. So I do understand where you want to take and be either more profitable or have a division of what we call, what do we call that?
Well, yeah, you're right. There's certainly an industry trend that during the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of consolidation where the same company would buy this stuff, and there were federal policies that allowed that to happen. What's happening now, partly there's the change in the industry and also the rise of digital, is companies are just seeing themselves differently.
Right.
And so the other kind of interesting factor about our situation a year ago was that the Scripps family had held the Sun and its other papers in a trust. And so there was a trust that said you had to own newspapers. And I don't know the specifics on this, but when a certain generation had all passed away, that trust dissolved. And so that had happened, which allowed the remaining family members and stockholders to take a look and say what is best for the future, and that was their decision they made to merge with Milwaukee. Fast forward to this year, a year after that decision was made, I suppose it made us marketable. I don't know all the ins and outs of how that happens, but the 13 Scripps papers combined with Milwaukee were then sold to the Gannett Company, which is the publisher of USA Today. And just Friday, that deal became official, and on Sunday was our first publication as a part of what's called the USA Today network. And we're learning about that now. We don't know everything, but the future of the Sun is kind of in the hands of a large organization, much larger than we've ever been a part of before. And so we're finding out what that means.
There's some good and bad. Some of the fun stats are that this paper now has, with these new mergers, 7 different states that they're, and 107
they just added,
daily papers in 7 states. We in Bremerton, the Bremerton or Kitsap Sun, is the only paper that they have in our state of Washington. So again, there's Bremerton's name that's being, in my opinion, special. Whenever we travel, I know, not just individually, but when people are on the road or flying somewhere, the USA Today is the most common paper, or I should say the most leverage of any paper throughout, I know, the United States. I'm not sure globally. But as you learn things, what I like about what you've done as the editor is you've always told the readers what was going on. And a reason for you being my guest today is that I'm looking for your script as you find more and more things out as how the paper is going to blossom again or have a resurgent. Our city is under such a new, exciting change that things to do with our print media, I think, is exciting as well. When we talked about being at your location for those 81 years, you are part of what happens in Bremerton. So one of the things that is a grand scale that you've brought up, and we talked earlier, $1 million has been raised for our local food banks, and there are 9 of them in the county that have benefited from the bell ringer. It comes out the first day of December, or does it come out after Thanksgiving?
After Thanksgiving.
Okay. And it's the readers of the newspaper that provide their name and provide their donations and contributions because they're the ones that are taking the paper. Is it also on that digital as well? Because it was about 2012 that all of our readers, our new millennials, are living off of their iPads and their smartphones. And when they want to know something, they just take a look at what's going on in their hand, now on their watches. How do you feel print versus digital is going in the future?
When you said, how are we going to blossom, it's digital. It really is. And we do a very good job for a paper our size. If you look around, I think there's a real focus on acquiring new readers that way, delivering stories and photos and other listings to people the way that they want it, the way they feel it's coming to them. I would point to a couple things, one of them being our social media presence. Very popular these days. Obviously just about everyone connects in some way socially. We're on the cusp, and we're going to be announcing this really soon in the paper, of 50,000 Facebook likes.
My goodness.
I don't know what is expected, but that's something we would never have imagined we would be at. We're just about there. We're going to have a little fun with it. We're going to give out some prizes to people who have liked our page. And so that's something that we feel has been really successful to see that. When we look at our peers, they don't have the same activity there. So I think we figured that one out, how to speak to people in a way that they like it. They have a lot of fun with it, and they're reading. It's not just glancing at headlines. We can track, and we can see people actually come through Facebook and they read stories. And that's the real key. Whether it's print, whether it's digital, as long as they're reading, that's what I want.
As long as they're getting that news. An interesting fact, and you may correct me, David, when I was county commissioner back in 2003, you had about a circulation of 22,000. Am I low on that for the newspaper itself?
Are you low on that?
In what the circulation was?
What
How
would
many?
Be today?
Well, when you say 50,000 for your digital, that's twice what you were.
Correct.
Just 13 years ago.
Correct. Yeah, I think maybe a good way to answer your question is, it used to be, 15 years ago, it was so easy to measure what you actually did every day, because all you did was count the number of papers that came off that press. We could do that, but I think it's really a lot more important to consider not only how many copies of the paper are going out, but how many copies of our weekly publications go out. We cover Bainbridge Island with a special product. We cover Gig Harbor with a special product. We cover Mason County, kind of places on the fringes.
And the Business Journal.
We have the Kitsap Peninsula Business Journal that reaches from Gig Harbor all the way to the other bridge, and covers a lot of different material, some in common with the Sun, some new, and some of a new audience that maybe wasn't connected with us. So we still have all of these products that are printed and going out that you would count. But then there's also, how do we measure what people are doing online with us? And that comes from not only how many stories get clicked on and read, but how long people are spending with stories. And that's something we really want to be attuned to. We've done several big packages, and I think the earthquake one is the most recent that we can talk about.
And the most people that I've talked to, they have kept that.
Yes.
And they've kept the preparedness and everything that's followed after that. That's not the first. You've done health, you've done drugs, you've done environmental, the things that surround us in our everyday living. And people don't get too excited if it doesn't affect them. But you've taken issues that affect all of us. And we all know someone that can fit somewhere in a catastrophic event or in a health event or something where we want to read it and we want to respond to it. Maybe that's because you have featured that and you're getting awards for that.
We are, and I think what you mentioned is really illustrative of my point that we could just count number of papers. I'd rather count the impact on the community and the engagement with people. And we see that in different ways. We see it when people show up to an event, when they take home a poster and share it with their neighbors, when they then organize the earthquake preparedness or talk about affordable housing because of what they read in the paper, or take action on making their yard cleaner because now they understand Puget Sound's health, something like that.
Correct. And I know you always put in the flags when we welcome home one of our ships that's in the naval base or the shipyard, the coverage that you've done. But getting back again to the association with the city and with the print, I like your writers, and you have a number of people that are on the blogs that aren't in print. So they have stories and they have ideas. Do they work from home or do they work in the office? How are you employing the numbers that are actually giving us the news?
We still, it's kind of a network that we work with. The reporters all still have desks, but they're in the field far more often than maybe they would have in the past, just because technology allows them to do that. And so if you walk through the sun and it feels quiet, that doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's going on.
Right.
We have a number who like to work in the field. That makes them accessible. It makes them really nimble and quick. And then you're right, we have a large number of either columnists or freelance writers from the community. We have doctors who contribute to our health coverage. We have authors who write for our gardening or food columns. And so we've done a really good job of taking advantage of that. And then there's other names that this community will recognize, like Chuck Stark,
Yes.
Who had retired and left, and they're doing some other things, but they still have a voice on our paper, and I think that's valuable. The years of experience for a paper this size is really remarkable, and I think that speaks to kind of this Bremerton, people here stay around. They love their community, and people have stayed with our newspaper, and because they love this community. I think that's a big advantage for us.
We have a large population of our military, lots of retirees, because people, once they are here, whether they were stationed here because of the military or their family brought them here, retirees, you know that I'm marketing our city for young millennials, because they're your digital. They're the ones that are this new, they're passionate, they work hard, and they want to have as much time to play as they do to the job. So we're not going to have them for 20 years or 30 years. How do you see, and we can use Tad Suter, or we could use Josh Farley. They're young, they love the city, and they do an exceptional job in the coverage. Then we have Chris Dunnigan, and he's a grandpa, but he loves the environment. So when you see a story about our orcas or about the gray whales, something that is affecting the environment, he brings a passion and that personal interest. The people they interview, not just the story. We get to a point where news has to be news. And I think that's where your digital is. But some of your writers bring a personality, and they have a relationship with your readers.
That's a good word to use. I think that's a really good word to use. And when you talk about developing new readers among millennials, or even people who just hadn't had a connection with us because they're new to town, they come with a ship, and how do they get involved with us? It's one thing to know the Sun is there and to have that brand and that history. And the stories will always drive that. Sure. They always will. The journalism is fundamental to what we do. But finding a time when they can come out with Josh Farley on a story walk and see him and get to know him, and then walk around and experience somewhere that we're explaining that news is going on, that's a new thing, and that's really something that we're trying to use more and more of, because I think it appeals to a lot of people. And what a good way for a new person to get to know their town.
That is,
then
and
show
you've
up
had
at one
over
of those.
100 on some of those story
We
walks.
have. It's very successful.
And I like, and it's digital, the 5 things that he does. I don't know where he got that 5 things, but he'll always tell us the 5 things during the week that are happening in Bremerton. He's our best marketer, and which makes you probably very proud. I have to think that with this new merger of the newspapers, you getting to know some of the new things that can happen, that can generate more than the 50,000. Do you have goals? Do you think that the paper is going to set any additional goals for what you've already accomplished?
Sure. Well, and kind of what my last answer was with the journalism itself at the core of what we do. That's the goal. The goal is to continue to do stories that really have an impact here, that mean something to people. The stuff you're talking about is wonderful too. The beat videos, the walks, the columns that we have, that's all good, and we want to keep doing it. But at the core, our goal is, let's keep doing stories that make this a better place, that sometimes will shine a light on the problems we have and how we solve those together. I think that's something that every community needs that. the best example is that recent piece on affordable housing.
Right.
That is something that's kind of difficult to talk to and maybe difficult to get everyone's head around, very complicated, but we hope we're going to lead the way into what do we do about this? What do you do? What does the city do? What do the organizations do? And so that's still the goal. Do we do it in a different way? Maybe, but that's what we're going to focus on.
And just that issue, I had a meeting with David Schultz from CHI and Harrison Medical Center, and his question to me, because of your article, was, Mayor, what do you think about affordable housing on the site where we're going to take and be vacating? So it's generating the idea that someone else didn't have. And I like that. I like when you bring the community into your paper. You've got the people that volunteer. Is it 6 months that you have your group? Or is it a year? So from all different areas, from the Port Orchard and Bremerton, Paulsbo, maybe Kingston, but throughout the county, they sit on the editorial board and they share some of the stories that they do. But through photography, you invite people to take, you might name a specific and say how many of you want to take and send in photographs. But that is amazing. And then we recognize our neighbors and our friends that are participating in your paper as well as what the paper itself does.
Yeah, that's Megan M. Reed is one of our photographers, along with Larry Stiegel, and that's her passion. And what she's done is, through that project, which runs one Sunday a month, is she's really not only shows off those photos, but teaches people something. That's what I like about it, because it's called a challenge.
Yes.
And so she writes, here's how I do this, shows a few examples, and then encourages you to mimic it or to try it your way. I think that's great. Another thing that you're going to like is, Megan is working on a project where she calls it the Frames Archive. And what she does, we have a great trove of photos from decades of Bremerton Sun history.
Yes.
And once a week or once every other week, Megan will go pull a envelope of slides and scans them, and so you can see a day in the life of what was going on that day, and then she puts them on her blog, the Kitsap Frames blog on our site. And so it's this wonderful thing of the people, because I think this is a town that really cares about its history, to be able to look at those and enjoy it and say, oh, I knew that. I remember when that was being built. I can see this. We found one the other day that we're going to use in our West Sound Guide magazine that comes out annually. It's coming out in May. And there's this photo that, other than the styles, it's people sitting on the ferry deck looking out with the sun shining back on them, and you think, I still see that exact same thing, and the clothes are just different today.
Right.
It's a great picture that reminds you, oh, we're the same as what we were back. We were enjoying the same thing 30 years ago.
It's exactly.
And it's still there, and it still retains. I think it's a great thing to do, and it reminds us who we are.
That is exciting. Are you going to be vying for leadership now? I know you're interim, so when everything and the dust settles and you're learning about all the different things that Gannett is preparing, I think that from what you've just told us, we're pretty unique. We've got things that other papers throughout our communities, Puget Sound region, the 3 counties, Jefferson, Clallam, and Kitsap, we're amongst lots of different groupings when we do things together, but your paper stands out. And I think that it would be wonderful to allow you to continue to have that focus, to have that exceptional appearance, and garner all the great things that are ever being said about your paper.
We hope to. And like I said, that's the goal, to keep doing what we're doing. We don't know everything that's going to happen in this new environment and ownership. And there's probably goods and bads, as with everything in life. But I think having the people that we have, the experience, the knowledge, and the care that our folks put into this, and that's reporters, but also ad salespeople, production people, everyone that gets involved in what we do, they really do. They care about this community. They care about what they're doing for people, and it really is a service. And so I think who the owner is doesn't change how that feeling comes across to people. So that's why I can still be encouraged about where we're going.
That's great. The paper's $1 a day. It's $2 on Sunday, $5 a month for the digital. I don't think there's anything any more affordable. It's much less than a cup of coffee. I prefer to have the paper where I can open it up. My husband loves certain portions of it, and like other families, we go to one place. I like what you've done with the obituaries, but I too find that they could be smaller with a photograph because you've got the online. There's so much more that people can do with that digital. So it sounds like you're meeting everyone's needs. I wish you the very best. I know that I'd love to see you at the very top because you've worked your way through, and being homegrown, like you say, in the state of Washington makes it very special for us. David, I appreciate you being my guest today.
You're welcome.
And I invite all of you to get in touch with our Kitsap son in some way or another. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time.